Coming up, celebrating 30 years of triumph. An Arizona tribe marks the anniversary of its first casino. Plus, 100 years later, and the fight for fair voting continues. We explore the state of Indigenous voting rights on the centennial of the Indian Citizenship Act on this week's IndigiPolitics. And honoring a legend. ICT remembers the impactful life and legacy of Ernie Stevens Senior. That's next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. A new report by the Washington Post reveals that over 1,000 Native American children were abused in boarding schools throughout the United States. The year-long investigation found at least 122 priests, sisters, and brothers assigned to 22 Indian boarding schools in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest were accused of sexually abusing Native American children in their care. The findings are based on lawsuits, oral histories, and thousands of boarding school records and personal accounts from former students dating back as far as the 1890s. In the Southwest, a historic water rights settlement has been signed that will ensure the supply of the Colorado River to 3 tribes. Navajo Nation President Boo Nygren recently signed the settlement, and it is now being sent to Congress for approval. He spoke in a press conference.
This will help us get started. This will help us keep us in our land, within our boundaries, and it all not only helps Navajo, Southern Paiute, but the Hopi people. And as I mentioned earlier, too, that it's so amazing to see 3 tribal nations come together because we all live within the same boundaries. We might as well fight together, and that's what they've done over the past several weeks.
The 3 tribes are seeking over $5 billion as part of the settlement. About $2 billion would fund a pipeline from Lake Powell. The settlement would require the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to complete the project by the end of 2040. The pipeline would provide water to dozens of tribal communities in remote areas where currently nearly a third of homes on the Navajo Nation lack running water. Well, a native costume designer for Killers of the Flower Moon is suing Apple, saying they were excluded from awards. Sault Ste. Marie citizen Christy Hoffman claims she did, quote, most of the research and costume design for the film, but was completely ignored in receiving credit at the Academy Awards and the Costume Designers Guild Awards. Hoffman is suing Apple, the costume designer who hired her, Jacqueline West, and the Costume Designers Guild for using her cultural expertise for historical accuracy, then attempting to, quote, erase her contributions. The lawsuit includes claims of breach of contract, retaliation, and infliction of emotional distress. Moving internationally, protests in Paris over Indigenous independence have become deadly. The French Pacific territory of New Caledonia has been gripped by days of fatal protests with 6 people killed and hundreds of others injured during armed clashes, looting, and arson. There have been decades of tension between France and the Indigenous Kanak people who have sought independence for the archipelago of 270,000 people. At the end of last month, President Emmanuel Macron met with political, business, civic, and youth leaders in New Caledonia, aiming to increase dialogue and formalize agreements. Well, June is Pride Month, and the occasion is already being celebrated around the world through various parades and festivals. That was the case in Florida, where the Miccosukee tribe of Indians hosted its Miccosukee Pride Fest on the first day of Pride Month. The event brought the Two-Spirit community together, including lots of dancing. Chief Francisco Marin reflected on the event.
For us, existing and preserving these ways is a way of resisting, so we can continue our traditional ways and learning from each other, and sharing wherever we go.
equitable voting rights for Indigenous communities continues to be a struggle. This is being highlighted by the centennial of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. Post-1971 miners are not covered under the Radiation Exposure and Compensation Act, affecting many Native American uranium miners. We get the latest update on a push to expand this act. And former President Donald Trump has been convicted of 34 felony counts. Here to talk more about how this could impact this year's election is regular contributor Holly Cook-Macaro. She is a principal at The Angle for this week's IndigiPolitics. Welcome to the newscast, Holly.
Hi, Polly. Thank you for having me.
So first, what does former President Donald Trump's conviction mean for this year's election?
Well, the former President Trump's conviction is going to mean that this topic is going to remain at the forefront, and even more so with his conviction, right? And things that would have derailed a presidency before. Think of Whitewater 25 years ago for the Clintons, right? That investigation. I think most people don't recall the substance, but the bar for what will derail a presidential campaign has certainly been lowered in the last decade. And the conviction of a former president and current presidential candidate of 34 felonies, it's been a very interesting week to see how that is being spun. And I think there are some efforts to build affinity with other felons, which there are a lot of humorous directions we can go here, but we're not going to. And I did find that one a bit comical. For Indian country, I think that Trump's conviction is going to make the fight for moderates and for in these there's just a few battleground states, right? Wyoming's red, California's blue. You take all those states, you're really drilling down to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Minnesota, which is still kind of purple, but in those, at Nevada, but in those states that I just named, those hot battleground states, 4 of them have significant Native American populations. Now, it really does seem, given by the fundraising numbers that came through, I think he announced $53 million the day after his conviction, which was the largest chunk of money that has been brought in. And that race has really been being won by President Biden. The amount of money that Biden has been able to raise in up against what President Trump has been able to raise, his conviction actually is Trump's conviction is making those numbers become a little bit more even. So I think those who are remain dug in on either side. It's going to be that middle ground. And oftentimes Indian country, we always say our issues are bipartisan or nonpartisan. And so Indian country, looking at the issues and looking at the candidates and who is going to align with their beliefs the most. I don't think any candidate is ever, perfect and aligns perfectly with folks' priorities. But that, I think, is where we are going to see some impacts in Indian country of Trump's conviction. That fight for the moderate voter, the middle of the road, and that is oftentimes where Indian country is falling. I really see that more and more. Over the years, there's been a historical alignment of Indian country with Democrats. I do see that there's a really kind of, looking at the candidates, looking at the issues, much of this driven by a very loud and great youth voice about, what are the issues? Where do we stand? What should we be demanding of our candidates? And there's such a whole conversation we can have about how these candidates can win the Native vote. But that fight for the moderates, I think is really where this conviction is going to point.
And this isn't the only case that Trump is involved in. So what are some of the other legal battles that Donald Trump is currently facing?
Well, I don't want to give a rundown of all of those. I think the fact that we have a president who is involved in several legal cases, again, just illustrates, I think, to America that the bar for what is okay in and what doesn't derail a presidency. I've always said that we hold our elected officials to a higher standard, and rightfully so, because they represent and make decisions on behalf of the American people. And for us in Indian country, those decisions affect us immediately. So I think that when the bar is lowered as to the standard we hold our presidential candidates, those impacts are going to be felt in Indian country. I hope that those considerations and are considered deeply.
It's been 100 years since the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act. What does this anniversary mean?
In all of this context, right? And part of what I was just saying is that Indian country really starting to look more at the issues. Though the 100th anniversary of the Citizenship Act, I think we're all celebrating it as a bit of, this is our 100th anniversary of our right to vote, which is a bit misleading because it didn't confer our right to vote. It took several more decades before all 50 states actually had conferred the right to vote on Native Americans. And as our friends at the Native American Rights Fund, who do such a great job in defending our access to the ballot, will tell you, it has forced new levels of creativity in keeping Native Americans from that unfettered access to the ballot, whether it be residency requirements, whether it be tribal IDs. There's always been something new. I admire NARF's 100% win track record in defending our access to the ballot, and that I think is really something that should be celebrated. I think as we move forward into this cycle with that narrative behind us, right? When we think about our ancestors who didn't have the right to vote and who fought for it, and who either fought in the military and came home and then gained that right to vote, but everything that it brings along with it, I think it makes it a more compelling argument than ever in an election where I'm hearing a little bit of, should I sit this one out? We should never sit these out. If knowing what our ancestors went through to have this access to the ballot, and the fight that continues today to ensure that we have equal access to the ballot, means that we should all be taking advantage of that right.
And what are some of the contemporary issues that, again, you named a few earlier in your answer, that continue to impact Indigenous voters' access to the ballot?
Well, we've seen in North Dakota, where knowing that most reservations don't have street addresses, I feel like since that case, there's been this more concerted effort nationwide. Back home in Red Lake, all of a sudden we have street addresses, although we weren't a target of that lawsuit. But it required IDs that didn't have just PO boxes. It required street addresses. And so those things take time and money and infrastructure investments that Indian country really had to scramble to accomplish in that election. I think, was that 2018, 2014, 2018. And so we continue to see the access to the ballot denied, in that we don't have polling places on reservations. Whether we can count our own ballots on the reservation, all of those issues are really, I think, systemic pieces that are built in and are remnants of racism back in the 50s, over the decades, as we've waged this fight for access to the ballot. We can count our own ballots, and we can have access, we can have ballot places, and we should on the reservation. So all of those fights continue today.
And the Radiation Exposure and Compensation Act will end June 10th if Congress doesn't act. Why is this program important to Indigenous communities?
Well, they call it the RECA, which is the, everything has a acronym in Washington, D.C. And it is important to Indian country, and particularly to the Navajo Nation, given the uranium mining and radiation exposure that was really, the heart of that in Indian country. And so the Navajo Nation has passed a resolution in support of Senator Hawley's bill that has passed the Senate, would reauthorize the bill, and it would expand it, eligibility, and also extend it to 2030. That bill has broad support in both chambers. Speaker Johnson, though, had intended to move a bill introduced by several members of the Utah delegation that would reauthorize it for 2 years. and it was much more limited. It didn't expand it. It was what they're calling a cleaner bill. And Speaker Johnson ran into a wall of opposition to moving that bill over the other. And so he was forced to pull that bill this week. And now the clock is ticking. Today is June 5th. We've got 5 days before that. When we say it expires, the authorization for the bill expires, and the opportunity to apply for the benefits if you were a victim of the radiation exposure, it expires on June 10th. So what I expect will happen is we see that Senate bill go to the floor of the House.
Well, Holly, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for joining the newscast.
Yes, thank you, Polly. It's good to see you.
Languages are among our most valued resources. Ensuring that they are preserved and taught is important in Indigenous communities and here at ICT. Today, we're continuing our Language Breaks segment, which features Native speakers from across Turtle Island sharing their beautiful and bold words and phrases. This week, we bring you the Hawaiian language from Kumukau'i Peralto and music from Kalani Pea.
E nā kinio ka aina e ala mai.
Mai maka'u I ka hana, maka'u I ka moloa. Mai maka'u I ka hana, maka'u I ka moloa. Don't be lazy. Mai maka'u I ka hana, maka'u I ka moloa. Don't fear work. Fear laziness.
If you have ever visited the Phoenix Valley, you've likely driven by various casinos owned and operated by local tribal nations. One example is the Gila River Indian community, which is an alliance of two tribes, the Acoma O'odham and the Peeposh. 30 years ago, in June of 1994, Gila River opened its first casino and has now grown to the largest casino enterprise in Arizona. I'm joined today in Phoenix with Gila River Resorts and Casino CEO Kenneth Manuel. Hello to you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
So we know that you all are celebrating your 30th anniversary, so exciting. Yes. But I want to start first. Take us back to the first enterprise that was opened in June of 1994.
Basically, that's where I started my career back in 1994. I started out actually in the slot department. It's one of the many departments that exists within the enterprise. I started out as a slot attendant. It's one of the line level positions within the casino. And so I was there on opening day. My badge number is actually number 19, which means I was the 19th employee for the enterprise back in 1994. I think I was all of 22 years old, but it was an exciting time for the Gila River Indian community. I'm also a proud member of the Gila River Indian community, so there's a lot of pride and a lot of joy along my journey with the enterprise.
And I imagine that it could have been totally venturing into the unknown because Arizona before this hadn't had casinos, and so it really was taking a leap of faith.
Exactly. I know that the legislature at the time, back in 1993, when the compacts were signed, it was something that was negotiated in good faith between the tribes of Arizona as well as the state and the legislators at the time. So it was exciting because Vegas had already had gaming, had casinos within the state of Nevada. So this would be the first time for Arizona to have casinos.
And if you are talking about present-day Phoenix, you hear and see the words Gila River all over the place, whether you're watching it on a commercial on TV or you're seeing sponsorships at the Arizona Cardinals games or the Phoenix Suns games even. What are the ways that you think that Gila River has really changed the narrative about visibility and what tribes are capable of here in the Phoenix Valley?
Definitely. Gila River Resorts and Casinos has definitely evolved as an enterprise. We've promoted our brand through so many different venues and outlets. We have amazing partners, the Arizona Cardinals, the Phoenix Suns, ASU, just to name a few. And so a lot of what we do is not only hospitality and creating memorable experiences for our guests, but also getting our brand out there in the Valley, in the state of Arizona, and just continuing to promote. We evolved through our marketing, we evolved through our partnerships, we evolved through just the different relationships that we have in the Valley.
You mentioned those NFL teams and the NBA teams. How does the tribe and the venture at large choose who they want to partner with? I imagine that's a difficult decision.
It is, and it's something that we started out very early on with. We were one of the first tribes in the state of Arizona. I believe we might have been the first tribe to actually partner with a Major League Baseball team many years ago. And so just getting our name out there, just promoting the brand, promoting what we do as an organization was important to us. Just like so many other businesses and services that partner with some of the professional sports teams out there, it was important for us to also get our name out there.
You mentioned earlier that you started at Gila River Resorts and Casinos on the floor. Did you ever dream that you'd be the CEO? And tell us more about that.
I get asked that question quite often. To be honest, no. When I first started with the casino back in 1994, I had no idea that I was going to eventually become the chief executive officer. I take great pride in the fact that I've learned from so many different mentors over the years, whether it be through business, whether it be through family mentors, my parents, whether it be through community mentors, different governors, different administrations within the Gila River Indian community. So many folks, I believe, I owe my success to them because they took me under their wing and they were very instrumental in my development and where I'm at today. So there's a lot of folks that I attribute my success to.
You know, being a citizen of the Gila River Indian community makes you uniquely qualified for this job. But tell us the ways in which it does do that. You know, the fact that you were raised in the community, as you just said.
Correct. I grew up in District 4 of the Gila River Indian community, Stothanek. I grew up before gaming existed within the Gila River Indian community. So there is a lot of history that I have, not only within the enterprise for the last 30 years, but also but also growing up within the community. So I've seen firsthand exactly how the community has benefited from gaming and from hospitality. So it gives me a lot of joy and a lot of pride in the success that we have, because I know exactly who benefits from the success.
That was the CEO of Gila River Resorts and Casinos. We'll have part 2 of our conversation with Kenneth Manuel next week, so make sure you tune in then. We'll be right back.
So I wanted to check in to see how everything was going with your pregnancy too.
Your food choices affect you, it affects the baby, and it affects your family. It's important to have a balanced diet with foods from all of the different food groups. Carbohydrates, water, fats, protein, vitamins, and minerals, all great things for baby. It's going to be 17.5 teaspoons of sugar in 1 can of iced tea.
I'm gonna back off on the Arizona tea for some time.
I really love and enjoy the program. It was an easy connection for us when I first met her. It was just like I could relate. She was welcoming. It made me feel comfortable.
Everybody has different beliefs. What I like about Family Spirit is that it takes that into consideration, honoring their beliefs and their background. For different cultures,
he babbles all the time, and like he'll point to banana and say, "You want banana?" So that's kind of how we communicate and know what he does want and what he doesn't.
Funeral services are underway in Wisconsin for a prominent Native American rights leader. The family of Ernie Stevens Senior shared the 92-year-old Oneida Nation of Wisconsin citizen died over the weekend. Stevens had a very long and storied career, working to push self-determination after graduating with a degree from MIT. He held many titles over the years, most notably as the executive director of the Los Angeles Indian Center and as the first vice president of the National Congress of American Indians. ICT's Mark Trahant has covered Stevens' career and weighed in.
I think we're just at the point where we're losing this whole generation of folks in the 1970s who really led tribal governments and tribal people through a really huge transition. It was the beginning of self-determination when tribes, not the federal government, were deciding things. And it was really important, and these were the folks doing it.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.